Today we're going to be talking about how do you find the equation for a parabola in these four different cases that we have here, shown here, using what's called the focus and the directrix. The focus is a focal point that is in front of the parabola. If you notice on that top graph, point A, so it's just a fixed point that has some distance from the parabola, and that helps us figure out sometimes where the vertex is so that we can write the equation. It also helps us graph it better. And the directrix, if you notice, below the parabola is just a horizontal line that is the same distance from the vertex that the focus is. So we call that value P. Sometimes they'll call it C, and so you just need to be aware that that is what the focus and the directrix is. So we're going to practice writing equations for all different four types that you see here, when it's up, when it's down, when it's facing right, when it's facing left, using our focus and our directrix. And so that's what the focus is, and that's what the directrix is. And you'll see here the p-value. So the p-value is the distance that it is from the vertex. So generally, if it is facing up or it is facing to the right, we have a positive p-value. If it is facing down or it is facing left, then we have a negative p-value. And so the directrix just goes that many spaces in the opposite direction. And we'll jump into solving them with equations, but first I'm going to give you a different way to write this equation because they wrote an equation here, but I'm going to write a different way to write it so that when you are writing your answers, this is the way that you'll need to write your problem. So notice when we have an up or a down parabola, what term is squared? The x term is what is squared. So, and if you notice, this is how you write the equation for an up or a down parabola. And so, okay, so let's write y equals 1 over 4p x squared. Notice, to solve for y on the top equation, all I would need to do is divide out the 4p, and so that's exactly what it looks like. It's just taken a step further. So on the one that is facing downward, this is how you would write it. Y equals 1 over 4p x squared. It's going to be the exact same as the one facing up. However, our p-value is going to be negative, so we will just know that that is going to be a negative p-value, causing a negative number right there. Okay, so facing right or left, notice our terms that are squared switch. So now, if we're solving for x, it's going to look like this. X equals 1 over 4p y squared. Notice the y is what's squared this time. X equals 1 over 4p y squared. Now, this is when you would use these equations right here when you know the p-value, and we'll talk about finding that in a little bit in some of our examples. But these are the equations where it's based off the vertex. So this is when your vertex is at 0, 0, or at the origin. Okay, that's when you would use this one. I'm going to show you in just a minute, after we do our first example, what you do when the vertex is not at the origin. And so our equation, how you would write it, looks a little bit different because we need to make room for our vertex, okay? So just know, this is when you would use when the vertex is at the origin. Okay, so on to our first examples. So it says, what is an equation of the parabola with vertex at the origin and focus at 0, 2? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a graph of it just so that you can see. So here's my vertex, and at 0, 2 is my focus. So knowing that my focus is in front of the parabola, it's going to be a parabola that looks like that. So from that, the goal is from that we should be able to tell what our p-value is. Remember, the p-value is the distance between your vertex and your focus. My p-value is positive 2. If my parabola would have been upside down, then it would have been p equals negative 2. So what I'm going to do is now I know that p equals 2. I can simply plug it into the correct formula. So y equals 1 over 4 times p x squared. So 4 times 2 is 8, so y equals 1 over 8x squared. That is the formula, the equation for the parabola with a focus at 0, 2. Now, what happens if our vertex is not at the origin? And so I'm going to write this right here. When vertex is not at origin. Okay, I'm going to give you the 2 ways that we will write it. So if it is up or down, so this is true for up or down. Remember, if it's up or down, that means the x is the term that is squared. So this is what it would look like. Y equals 1 over 4p times x minus h squared plus k. So you can remember from the few times before when we've talked about vertex form, h and k are my vertex. So this is the form that you would write it in if you have an up or down parabola. You would write it x equals 1 over 4p y minus k squared plus h. That is for when our parabola is left or right. Okay, so notice your h and your k values go with the x or the y. So my vertex is hk. So my x value always stays with my h, and my k value always stays with the y. So we'll do some examples later where we'll see this come into play. But for now, just know this is the equation, the generic equation that we'll use where we'll plug in our p value, plug in our h value, and plug in our k value. On to example 2. It says, identify the vertex, the focus, and the directrix of the parabola with this given equation. Then sketch the graph of the parabola. So first off, we can't sketch the parabola until we know what is our p-value. Okay, so notice this, our generic equation is 1 over 4p x squared. So if my bottom value is 8, that means negative 8 technically because of that negative out in front. So if it is, I needed to multiply by negative 2. So that means that my p-value is negative 2. So we're going to be able to use p to graph now. Notice because I don't have an h and a k, that it's at the vertex, at the origin. So my vertex is at 0, 0. So I am going to go ahead and put my vertex on there. Now, if my p-value is -2, first off, let's look and see. If I have the x squared term, that means that my parabola is either up or it's down. It is up when p is positive. It is down when p is negative. So look at your p-value. We know p is -2. So I know that my vertex is actually my parabola is actually going down. So that means if my p-value is -2, the distance is 2 from the vertex, so I'm going down. So this right here is my focus. This is my vertex. And now I need to find my directrix. Now remember, directrix is just a line behind the parabola, and so it is direct. Since my p-value is 2, then that means that my directrix is going to be along the line y equals 2. Just like that. And then you can graph it, draw a rough sketch, make sure it looks like a parabola, and that is graphed. So my p-value is 2, my vertex is 0, 0, so that means that my focus is at 0, -2, and my directrix is always an equation. So if your directrix is always an equation, that means we've got to figure out what is the equation for the line that we just drew, that dotted line, the directrix, right here. And that's going to be y equals 2. If it was a straight up and down line, then that means it would be x equals 2. So this is all of the information that they asked us to find, the vertex, the focus, and the directrix, and to graph it. So we're done with example 2. On to example 3, it says, write an equation of a parabola with a vertex at the origin and given the directrix equation. So first off, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to graph this so that I can see. That's always a good idea, is draw a rough sketch if you're not sure. So if my vertex is at the origin and I have a line, a directrix at y equals 2, what does that mean my p-value is? That means that my p-value is going to be 2. The distance is 2. Now, that means that my focus is down here. And remember, if it's an upside down parabola, then your p-value is actually -2. So this would be what it would look like. So to write the equation, I know, remember, an up or down equation means that the x is the squared term. So you're going to write the equation y equals 1 over 4p x squared. So plug in p and you're done. Y equals 1 over 4 times -2 x squared. So my final equation is y equals -1 over 8 x squared. And that is the equation given the directrix is at y equals 2. So now let's take a look and see when our directrix is at x equals -3. So again, it's always a great idea, just sketch a rough graph. So again, your vertex is at the origin, and here is my directrix. This is going to be a sideways parabola. So first off, let's figure out what our p-value is. Remember, the p-value is the distance from the vertex to the directrix, or the distance from the vertex to the focus. So that's going to be 3. Now, that means I'm going to go 3 this way, and right here is my focus. So when I'm sketching a graph, it's going to look like this. Okay, so if it's facing right, then that means I have a positive p-value. If it's facing left, then that means I have a negative p-value. So in this case, p is +3. Now, because it's a sideways parabola, that means the y is the term that's squared. So to write the equation, it's going to look like this. x equals 1 over 4p y squared. So I'm just going to plug in p and then you're done. 1 over 4 times 3 y squared. So x equals 1 over 12 y squared. And that is the equation when your directrix is at x equals -3. Down to the next example where it says write an equation for a parabola with the given parameters, then graph it. So first off, I'm going to graph it first because that helps me write the equation. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to sketch a rough graph. My focus is at -3, 5. So here's my focus. My directrix is at x equals 3. So that is a line just along x equals 3. So somewhere in between, halfway in between actually, is my vertex, right? So first off, let's count and see. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units from our focus to our directrix. So if it's 6 units, then that means 3 units is halfway in between, and so right here is going to be my vertex. This is my focus. So that means the graph looks something like this. Okay, so first off, this is where the other equation comes into play, where we're going to end up using the one with the vertex. So just take a note. These are the ones that we're going to start using. Okay, so going back up, we have our we have a vertex at, let's go ahead and write the order pair down. Our vertex is at 0, 5. That's my vertex. Now, because it's a sideways parabola facing left, first off, I need to know my p-value. There's 3 units between our vertex and our focus and our vertex and our directrix. Right? The distance from here to here is 3. And from here to here is 3. So p is 3, but because it's facing left, it's -3. That also means that it is an x equals equation. X equals 1 over 4p y minus k squared plus h. So that's the basic equation that we're going to plug all of our information into. I know p is -3. I also know my vertex. Remember, this is h and this is k. So x equals 1 over 4 times -3 times y minus 5 squared plus 0. So if I rewrite that, it's going to say x equals -1/12 y minus 5 squared. And you don't have to put that plus 0, so we're done. This is the equation. So graphing it helps you write the equation. I would always recommend graphing it first and then writing the equation from your information. So we're going to do that again. We're going to write our equation of a parabola with the given vertex and focus. So here we go. We're going to graph it out first so that I can find my p-value. So my vertex is at 4, 1. So here's my vertex. And my focus is at 6, 1. So this is my focus. This is my vertex. So that means it's facing to the right. So what would be my p-value, the distance between my vertex and my focus? So p equals 2. And because it's facing to the right, it's going to be positive 2. So what I'm going to do now, because what's the only thing that's missing on my graph? That's the directrix. So I need to go backwards for my vertex. So if this was 2, I'm going to go 1, 2 back, and here is my line for my directrix. And that's going to be at x equals 2. Now, this isn't really needed to write the equation, but I just wanted to show you. So from this, our vertex is 4, 1, and our p-value is 2. Those are the two things that you have to have in order to graph, in order to write the equation. So if it's facing right, that means it's an x equals equation. So x equals 1 over 4p y minus k squared plus h. So remember, this is h, this is k. So x equals 1 over 4 times 2, y minus 1 squared plus 4. So you see where I plugged in my h and my k and my p. So I'm going to rewrite it as 1 over 8 times y minus 1 squared plus 4. And that right there is your final equation. So we're going to do one more example. Again, I'd always recommend graphing it out. That way you have the graph to go to find your p-value. Okay, so my vertex is at 7, 2, so right here. And my focus is at 7, negative 2. So right here. This is my focus. This is my vertex. What is the p distance? It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. P equals 4. However, we know that it's going to be going downward, so my p-value is actually negative 4. So now that I have my vertex, and now that I have my p-value, I can write the equation. Now, it's a graph that's going downward, so the x term is what is squared, so y equals 1 over 4p times x minus h squared plus k. So notice the difference between this one and the one we just did. Right here. Make sure you don't get those mixed up. Your h always goes with your x value and your k always goes with your y value. So I'm just going to plug in my p-value and my vertex. 1 over 4 times negative 4. X minus 7 squared plus 2. So y equals negative 1 over 16 x minus 7 squared plus 2. And that is your final answer.